Welcome everyone to the CSIE podcast series, Best Minds and Associations. And we have one today. We're joined today by Shepard. Let me tell you a little bit about Stephen. He began his role as the executive director of the Denver Owners and Managers Association, commonly known as BOMA. Stephen started there in January of 2019. He came to Denver via the same organization, the BOMA in Austin, Texas, another very similar city to Denver, so I'm sure you were well acclimated to what to expect. Stephen is a CAE, Certified Association Executive, and has been active in member-based associations since 2003. Stephen's been active also in other parts of associations as a promoter of the importance of bringing young professionals into the membership of an organization. He's very passionate about mentoring, and at the Institute of Management Accountants helped establish what I think is a pretty cool program, the Backpack to Briefcase series at the student conference. Stephen earned his BS in Curriculum and Instruction from Texas A&M. This is on his bio, he says he's a military brat, but he has I don't know if I've ever met anybody that's done this. He's visited all 50 states as well as numerous countries on 3 continents. He said his dream vacations are the Galapagos Islands and Australia and New Zealand. I'm sure you're going to get there. And there's a long list of volunteer work that Stephen's done. So Stephen, thank you today for joining us. We really appreciate you being with us today.
Well, thanks for having me. This is exciting. I'm glad that somebody thinks I have a mind.
Yeah, we do. We totally do. I've been in Stephen's presence and he is a thinker. So we're really honored to have him here today. So today's topic, our podcast topic, is personal brand and business etiquette. And so, Stephen, I'm going to hit you with a series of questions today, and we'll see where this goes. But what are the elements that make up a personal brand, and why is that important?
So, this kind of came about as having conversations with a lot of young professionals coming into the different industries, and associations I've worked with. And I think that what people forget is that you're viewed by others the exact same way that we view Apple or Ford or Starbucks or whatever. And so we all have a brand as to when people hear your name, what is it that others think about when they hear that, based on their interactions with you, based on maybe articles that you've written or whatever. And so you can control that brand. And so I think the conversation is making sure that young professionals understand that in today's environment with social media, et cetera, that their brand sometimes is extended beyond just work. And the brands, or your personal brand, is more blended now, where before, you and I are old enough that when we left work and would go out with our friends, we could trust that those would stay separate. Today, that's not necessarily the case, right? Your social media posts, your social media presence, you're out and about on, everybody's going out, foodie's big thing, so people are out and about a lot more. You run into your boss and you're drunk. We talk about those kinds of things and how you need to be prepared to set yourself up to make sure that your reputation or personal brand, is the way I like to call it, is what you want it to be.
So good point, Stephen. So is that something that someone can learn, or is it something that is inherent in people? Did they maybe learn it from their parents? And where do the different generations come into play with all that?
So it's really interesting when we start talking about generations and people, I mentioned emerging professionals as they come into the workplace, that, they don't need to only be thinking about how their peers perceive them. But if they come into the workplace and there's a baby boomer that they're working for, where is that baby boomer's point of reference coming to, right? So, we were raised dressing totally different than young people dress today, or, wearing our hair totally different than young people today. We didn't have the social media presence, manners are different, language is different.
Sure.
Think about, one of the things the F word is part of a lot of people's everyday vernacular, and it doesn't shock people.
Yep,
where
right.
We grew up, you didn't, that word, if that ever came out, you'd, get a whipping.
Yep, you
right?
certainly would. Yep.
And so, but the other piece of it that's really interesting is that while there is generational, each generation, there are back to your point of how you were raised that come into play, whether you were raised in the city, whether you were raised in the country, were you raised with a family that had money, or were you raised with a family? So there's all kinds of things based on your background that are going to influence, how you present yourself. So I think there's things within that are innately within us that we were raised. Like, you'll never get me to stop saying yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, yes, or no, sir. Right? That's ingrained in my head. I can't stop that. And people will say, you don't need to say that to me. And it's like, well, sorry, that's
Sure.
the way I am.
Sure.
However, I think there's a lot that people can learn. So if you weren't exposed to, going to a luncheon like many of us have, and there's two forks to the left of your plate, you can obviously learn how to make sure that you present yourself well, where the napkins are and all those kinds of things. And so
Sure.
there's a lot about that that can be learned. You can adjust your language. I grew up in the South, Texas and Mississippi and Virginia, and went to college in Texas, but
Yeah.
through speech classes and education, they really kind of the fix into, and y'all still comes out every now and again. That'll never go away. But,
Sure. Sure.
so I've learned to try to be much more balanced with my speech. For instance, I don't have a lot of accent or whatever that. So,
Right.
I think that that's something that can be learned as far as how people want to be perceived.
Okay. So tell me, where does authenticity come into play in all of this with personal branding?
Well, I think it's extremely important because we all want to be known as an authentic person, right? You don't want to come across as fake. So I think how you present yourself, making sure that it's your truth, right? And I think that there's things about each one of us that we should be proud of, and not allow somebody else's opinion change that. We want that to be part of our brand. So to use a very basic example, I had a boss one time that critiqued me for saying y'all in an email. Well, I personally use y'all in an email because I'm very proud to be from Texas in the South. And that's kind of one of the funny things that people notice about me, right?
Right. Yep.
And so I'm not going to apologize for that. And I think there's a lot of things that, whether it's from the part of the country you come from, whether it's your ethnic background or whatever, don't apologize for those things that are your truth. However, I think sometimes people feel like that, I've known people, and I'm sure you have too, that when they're complimenting you on something, sometimes it comes across as over complimentary, right?
Yes.
And you're like,
Yep.
okay, are they being truthful? Or are they just trying to be nice or trying to win brownie points or whatever? So I think that there's that line, right? With being yourself and being truthful, but not trying to come over the top with trying to make other people think maybe that something that you're not.
Okay. So be your authentic self, right? I mean, it's
Right.
something that was drilled into me and my sisters, and ironically, with my 4 adult children, just sometimes my mouth opens up and my dad's words come out, and that's just
Right.
that's just the way it is. But I'm proud of that. So tell us, if you're a young professional, which we've been talking about, and someone's listening to this and they're saying, he's right, and I would really like to grow my personal brand. It's challenging in this environment. We were talking earlier about the virtual environment, and just for our audience, Steve and I are actually going to be at an in-person meeting hosted by Dot Miller on Friday, and I find myself very excited about it. But this is a challenging time because we're spending so much time virtually. What are some things that people can do when working remotely and meeting virtually that can grow their personal brand and visibility?
Well, we're on these Zoom meetings so much, and I feel like that the positive of it is that Zoom has replaced that freeconference.com number that we were all using right prior to the pandemic.
Exactly.
Um,
Yeah.
I think we all had. I know we had Zoom early on in 2019 here at BOMA, because we had started talking about how could we help our members who can't get away from their desks be able to participate in education, right? And so we were starting to plan down that route. Well, as we all know, the pandemic forced us all to learn how to use it.
Yeah.
And I think that you have to think about, whenever you're getting on, what is the perception with the group, the perception that you want to have with the group that you're going to be engaging with,
Right.
right? So if it's something that's going to be a big, large group and there's 100 people coming on, I would say you still want to make sure that your camera's on. Are you dressed professionally? Are you, so how are you presenting yourself through that? Even though you might not think, because there's 100 people, nobody's going to notice you, somebody's going to notice you,
Sure.
right? There's somebody that's going to see you. And so that's their first impression of you. And so just like when you meet face to face, that first 7 seconds, people are going to make based on what they see on the screen or don't see on the screen.
Sure.
And so, it's interesting because there's calls that I'm on, that where you're mostly listening. And so people turn their screens off. And I know, people are probably not paying as close attention as they should. However, I think that, do you want to be known as the person who people are perceiving to be checked out? Or do you want to be known as the person who's engaged? So how do you make sure that they can tell that you're engaged, and whether it's coming on, are you participating in the chat? Or so I think there's things that you can do that you would normally do in person that are different, that are still going to give people the opinion that you want them to have, is that you're engaged, you're participatory, you're there for a purpose and not just there to take up a box. I think camera is so important. It's not like you have to have these fancy backgrounds and all of that, but if you're really big on what you want people to remember, it's not hard either to create a background or find a background, that can represent you.
Sure.
As to what you want to be known for. But if it's, the smaller group it is, I think it's even more important that you try to make sure that you're engaged and vocal rather than using the chat and such.
You just mentioned the first 7 seconds. So we're all getting ready to get back to meeting in person. The CSAE conference plug is up in Vail, Grand Hyatt, end of June, first part of July.
Better see you all there.
Yeah, exactly. Registration is active. But talk about, so, one of my kids said, I don't know if I'm ready to go back to regular meetings because I'm so used to this. Give our audience maybe the top 2 things that you think when you walk into a room or that you go to meet somebody. What are the top 2 things, Stephen, that you think are important with elevating your personal brand in an in-person environment?
Right. Well, I think the first thing that we have to remember in this environment, and BOMA had their first luncheon, and it was a hybrid. So we had 80 people in person. You have to approach everyone today, and the very first question out of my mouth is always, where are you in this time? Are you shaking hands? Are you fist bumping? Are you hugging? So meeting the person that you're approaching where they are, because they may not be in the same spot you're in. I mean, I'm a hugger. That has been the hardest thing with the pandemic.
Sure,
not having
I get it.
My normal hugs. And
Yeah.
So, but I still ask that question rather than just walking up to people that even I think I know pretty well. Every time I meet them, I ask them where they are. So I think that's the first thing that's different. And I have found that people are very, very respectful of that, from the standpoint that they look at you and appreciate it, right? That you're
Sure.
being that kind of a person. And then the other thing I would say is, I have a fear, to be honest with you, that the pandemic has caused us to become casual.
Good point.
Research was shown back, and you remember when everybody's casual Fridays started coming into
sure.
vogue, right?
You bet.
And then next thing you know, that became casual every day except jeans on Friday, right? And then it became, right? And so we've gone down this path of, the emerging professionals always laugh because I say, when did yoga pants and basketball shorts become attire that you wear when you go out shopping somewhere, right?
Thank you.
And so then they laugh at me because I'm old and say that. But I think that when you think about how people working at home, and research shows that when you are dressed to impress, as I would say, and it doesn't mean that you're in a suit and tie and blah, blah, blah.
Sure. Yep.
You're even on the telephone, your demeanor is different versus if you're in your sweatpants or, shorts or yoga pants or pajama bottoms or whatever.
Yep.
Just the way you feel when you dress is different. So I think that, you need to be very cognizant of, have you become kind of casual in the way that things are done because you've been on Zoom? And
Sure.
so it's easier to hide some of that casualness, that when we get back in person, making sure that you're back to presenting yourself the way you want to be seen,
Yeah.
and how you want to be known and remembered.
It's going to be interesting how we all come out of that, right? I mean, so you make some good points. I at least weekly, I'm a big sport coat guy, and so I have quite a collection, and I go visit them at least once a week and just kind of brush the dust off the shoulders and things. So yeah, personally, I'm looking forward to, and I know my dry cleaners are too.
Right.
How they've kept in business is beyond
Oh,
me.
I
But
have a mask and matching bow tie.
there you go. Okay.
Yeah. So I had to do a presentation during COVID, and so I made sure that, yeah.
Sure. So Stephen, kind of last question for me, and then I'll ask if you have any last comments. But what are some tips? I mean, you've talked about a lot of great ideas and a lot of things that are really important, but credibility and trust all come into play in this situation with building personal brand. My father, he used to say a lot of things and try to teach a lot of things, and so many of the things we'd go, yeah, whatever, you're old, what do you know? And then of course they've all come back and they've all been very, but one thing he always talked about was, when you build trust, it's relatively easy to build trust. If you lose it, it's almost impossible to get back. So as it relates to personal brand, authenticity, et cetera, what are some tips that you would give our audience today on not just building credibility and trust, but maintaining that credibility and trust? Does that make sense?
It does. Makes
Okay.
total sense. And I think that, the first thing is making sure that you understand where those around you, especially in your work environment, where they're coming from. So, understanding their viewpoint and understanding why, somebody that's of my age would wonder why yoga pants and basketball shorts are kind of odd,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
And so it doesn't mean that I think less of you because you dress like that. But I think it's important for you to stop and think about, okay, so if that's how I'm going to react, then understanding how I present myself in the workplace, is going to be, I might need to adjust in order to ensure that my brand that I want to come across is being interpreted by that person in the way that I want it to be interpreted. And the biggest component of that, I think, is communication, right? When you think about all the ways we communicate today, there's we've got email, we've got texting, now we're on Zoom. And so I think that understanding how you can ensure there's not miscommunication happening is the way that you can ensure that that credibility and authenticity. And, if there is miscommunication, being the first to own it. If you send an email to someone and they have questions coming back, if you can't answer all those questions and be assured that they're going to get the answers to those in the next email, pick up the phone and call them. Don't rely on texting to be the be all end all communication tool, et cetera. Even though you might be doing that with your friends, that's not going to necessarily be the way, and for instance, I can't tell you how many people connect with me through LinkedIn to ask me a question rather than emailing me at the office.
Sure.
Those kinds of things, just kind of think about that perception.
Well, listen, Stephen, any last thoughts, anything you want to share with our audience before we close the session?
I'm just going to repeat that we certainly hope we see everyone at the annual conference. I know the programs committee put a lot of work into trying to put together a great program, and I know the hotel is doing a lot of great things to make sure everybody feels safe. And I am just so ready to be with people again.
Amen. Amen. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Shepard, the Building Owners and Managers Association in Denver. Thanks so much for spending time with us this afternoon. Really, really meaty things. And I think our audience is going to be able to get some really wonderful takeaways. So thank you for that. Want to remind everybody that these podcasts are posted at the CSAE website, which is csae.org. So tune in and check out the podcasts that are coming up in the future. Stephen, thanks again, and everybody, thanks for being part of CSAE.
Thanks, everyone.